Welcome to Let's Talk with Hart Hagen, and today I'm joined by three property owners from Bullitt County who are in the path of the proposed pipeline by LG&E. I'm joined by Christy Collins, by Colonel Rich Parker, and Dr. Paul Whitworth. How are y'all doing today? Don't everybody talk about it.
We're glad to have your interest in our issues and concerns.
It's my pleasure. I wish there were different circumstances, honestly. So there's so many reasons to not build this pipeline, but it's, I should just back up and let you all talk. Y'all are all three property owners that have been affected by the proposed pipeline and would be affected if the pipeline goes through. And so who wants to start? Colonel Rich Parker, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your property and your experience with this pipeline and where you think we should go with it.
Well, let me just start with, for those that may have interest, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to have the platform and you hosting us so that we can have a voice in this outside of the legalities and the legalese and all the court hearings that we have to go through frequently during each month. But I would just like to, if the best way that I can think to communicate to the general public what we've gone through is much like it's a microcosm of what our nation has gone through with the abuse that the FBI has imposed during the FISA court, the 17 significant violations that the FBI did against Trump and his campaign personnel as well as his administration. And why is that important? And what is the analogy here that we see is that we also, with LG&E's initial request for a permit to be granted by, that request had to be granted by the Public Service Commission. From the moment that they initiated that, there has been zero transparency to the public. Most of the discussions have been held in secret. All of the local and state agencies and some federal agencies have acted much like the FBI in 17 significant violations. They have all been in violation of basic protocols, procedures, and regulatory guidance for laws that are already on the books and exist in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The fact that we are where we are now and why it's taken 3.5 years and LG&E still has no permit is simply based on those three factors. Number one, they were in violation, both LG&E and individuals within these state agencies are supposed to see oversight of the public and the Commonwealth and the taxpayers. But those individuals were not transparent. They did violate protocols, procedures, and regulatory oversight. And because of that, and because of all the collusion between the agencies and the individual entities that make decisions for permits, that's why it has been extended for 3.5 years. We are still arguing for the basic premise that the community was never informed by its elected officials in Bullitt County or the state. It has never been given a voice by the Corps of Engineers, although they have been much more helpful and have been much more in compliance with oversight of this project. But none of the state entities have ever made a single decision in favor of the taxpayers, which shows you, number one, the collusion that a independent-owned utility company, which basically owns a monopoly, the amount of power and influence they have, even when they do things openly, and it's found out that most of those activities the permits were granted under illegal premise. So that's where I would start with.
So,
the
Rich,
frustration level is.
What I hear you saying, Rich, what I hear you saying is one, lack of transparency, two, collusion between corporations and the government. Three, not having the proper permits that should be required to go forward with these projects. Am I on the right track with that?
Well, you are, and what's even more frustrating is the fact that the very agencies that are supposed to oversee these regulatory guidelines and the laws that are already been approved by the state legislature and federal legislatures, these agencies have basically been rubber stamping and provided no oversight of any of these, which has a direct second and third order effects on all taxpayers in the Commonwealth. If our agencies that are hired and paid for by taxpayer money aren't going to oversee regulatory requirements on these utility companies, who's protecting our health? Who's protecting our quality of life, our children, our way of life, our property and estate rights have all been ceded over to a bunch of bureaucrats and corporations that basically deny us civil and constitutional rights at the state and the federal level.
Well, why shouldn't they just be able to do what they want?
Why shouldn't
We still have this thing called the Constitution, right? That's part of it. You know, that's the first, 5th, 10th, 14th Amendments to the Constitution and that whole right of due process. And there's overlay issues that says that the state must engage in public involvement. Feds definitely have to engage in public notice and what's called notice and comment. And I don't know if Art got it, but I did send you a copy of that legal notice. Mm-hmm. Did you get that on the phone? At what, they ran this quote legal notice 2 times in the Pioneer News and said that was official legal notice. They're saying that they said in that thing that it was 30 days and closed on such date. And if you look at that, it's clear from the very beginning of any of these processes that that was never published in legal notices. And when we have the county judge sitting there telling us in open public meetings, well, we've looked for these records between our office and a previous judge, and there is no records. Well, anytime with a governmental agency, public records must be maintained. And if public records have disappeared, that is a big problem. And that is just one indicator from ground zero up that no one around this area knew about this pipeline. The LG&E customers in Jefferson County, Bullitt County will be paying for this. For what end? Kind of like follow the money.
Yeah, if I may.
And so, I'm sorry?
Real quick, to support your point there and to harden the larger listening audience, LG&E was granted a rate increase in 2016. All the Commonwealth taxpayers and ratepayers for LG&E services and their gas and electricity have been paying for this pipeline since 2016 based on that rate increase request. The permit to build the pipeline with that rate increase is what they don't have. So my question is, what has happened to the multi-millions of dollars that the Commonwealth taxpayers and utility ratepayers have paid into LG&E? Where is that money? And is that rate increase going to be stopped by the Public Service Commission when the pipeline, if a pipeline goes in the ground, is finally put in the ground and service for Jim Beam? Is the Public Service Commission and LG&E going to go back to the drawing board and request that rate increase be dropped now that it's no longer needed to pay for Jim Beam's pipeline?
So what you're referring to there is, and I want to say to anybody that might be watching from LG&E or Jim Beam that my phone number is 502-303-8293. We want to get everything factually correct. If there's anything here that we are not saying that is not factually correct, then we need to know about it. But it's our understanding that the Public Service Commission, speaking for myself, it's my understanding that the Public Service Commission approved a rate increase that Rich is talking about, whereby this pipeline would serve one customer almost exclusively. That one customer that this pipeline would serve almost exclusively is Jim Beam, and yet Jim Beam doesn't want to pay for it. This has been published by Ryan Van Velzer of WFPL. It was in his article that he wrote about this. But, why should average ratepayers pay for a $27 million pipeline that they're not going to get any benefit from? Jim Beam is going to benefit from this pipeline and yet does not want to pay for it. Am I on the right track with that, guys?
Well, you also need to remember Jim Beam is not even an American company. It's Japanese owned now. And part of this stuff has come out. The state has, similar to the feds, what's called Freedom of Information Act. There's open records requests. And Tom Fitzgerald, the Kentucky Resource Council, had to hit Public Service Commission 3 times, basically threatened them with lawsuit 3 times, produce these records, let's see what you've done, because you're claiming basically national security. They didn't say national security. They said confidential, proprietary secret that we're going to keep this stuff restricted, closed access. The public can't know about it because we're going to depress land prices and we're going to quell opposition. And right there, the public has been blocked out of this the entire way. So when we look at this, there's a couple lawsuits in progress right now. Those kinds of documents will come out. But I can tell you, I can point to you to documents right now that came out of that open records request that is in the public domain and also in administrative hearings and other things that specifically state within there that they actually examined at least 10 different routes, none of which included the route here. So why were they looking at routes everywhere in the world except in this area that they're actually putting the pipeline? It actually states in there at least 2 times for Jim Beam. Lonnie Beller's testimony, Vice President of LG&E, actually said, yeah, well, we're looking at this area. We have this need. We have this large customer, and based upon Economic Development Authority and this large customer, we're going to do this thing here.
They didn't want to say who that customer is. This is citing customer privacy. It's like Jim Beam.
If you look at LG&E study, LG&E paid for a study for a private contractor that works for them called Insight USA, and that private contractor had studied 10 different routes. And in those 10 different routes, they were going to LG&E, and LG&E is mentioned in that study multiple times. No other beneficiary is noted. When you look at the foundation for what they call the Certificate of Public Need and Convenience Necessity, they said they're going to serve 9,500 people down there in Claremont. If we count everybody and their dog and their cats, we can't get 200 or 300 people.
So,
and there's no projection.
Part of this is a public interest. This pipeline is supposed to be based on the public interest. That's part of what eminent domain, the theory of eminent domain requires, that if you're going to, run a pipeline through people's property, there has to be a public need for that. And you're also saying, Paul, that there's a certificate of public need. So there's a pretense here that this is something that's going to serve the public, and yet Jim Beam is the only customer, and LG&E at one point in time couldn't reveal, couldn't disclose who that customer is. But this is all supposed to be in the public interest. So you have all this privacy, all this secrecy, all this confidentiality, but yet this is in the public interest. What am I missing?
Well, the other component of that is on that certificate, not only does this thing have to be in the public interest, but there's got to be a not dire need for this. There's not a quick, easy, reasonable alternative. And even the LG&E documents that came out of that open records request and other sources that we found states clearly, yeah, they could have came up from Magnolia down by Elizabethtown. There's some areas over there toward Fort Knox. There's some areas up near Louisville. There were alternative routes and alternative sources that it could come into.
So does the route of the pipeline depend upon who the supposed customers are? And they're saying 9,500 customers when really it's just one customer. Am I getting that wrong?
No. So let me to clarify, you were right. The first question you asked earlier, the definitive answer to that was yes. The second part of that is, how do you define public need and necessity? As Paul stated, they're claiming that they're going to serve proposed 9,500 personnel and civilians and homeowners down in Claremont. There are no plans to build 9,000 or even 4,500 homes to pay for Mr. and Mrs. to move into Claremont in the next 20 years. So what drove that, and what drove the direction that the pipeline is taking, we believe, and what our evidence has shown from 3.5 years of our digging in the trenches, so to speak, and with the open records request has shown that the Economic Development Authority of Bullitt County, with John Snyder at the time as the lead, and now Mr. Tucker is the lead. John Snyder got out of town because this all started blowing up, and we took it to court. But he made a quick exit, and he now lives in Florida. But we know that the Economic Development Authority for Bullitt County and Jim Beam were the ones that dictated which route the pipeline was going. What the public needs to also understand is we want to know why the route was chosen the way it is, because it effectively cuts the last large farms, the homesteads in eastern Bullitt County moving west toward Jim Beam. It cuts those farms effectively in half, dividing them, making it easier to not only devalue that, but trying to move cattle from one side of the land to the other where most of the water sources are. It almost makes it too arduous for those farmers to continue to farm and make a profit, thereby setting the condition for those farms to possibly be sold at bottom dollar cost as agricultural, only to be turned around and resold to developers who want to build more warehouses and more industry on what we now know are the last remaining homesteads in eastern Bullitt County. So that's what the record shows. That's what the facts lay down. I just requested another fax.
Yeah. If we look at Bullitt County government and what Bullitt County government was supposed to do, Bullitt County government was supposed to make sure that everything they do is consistent with the Bullitt County Comprehensive Plan. Most of this area in this part of Bullitt County is designated for conservation. That we have you may have heard of Bernheim's big level acquisition. Before it was ever established, we had multiple natural areas out here, state designated natural areas like the Pine Creek Forest, Pine Barrens. We've got Apple Valley out here. We've got the only sites within the world, this part of Bullitt County and a part in Jefferson County, that holds Kentucky glade crest, threatened and endangered species. We have multiple threatened and endangered species in this area. And part of the arguments of LG&E has been, well, screw Bernheim, because Bernheim was not involved in this process early on. Well, what the public needs to understand, it's like any national park or any other federal reserve that's established, that the area that Bernheim acquired is part of the big level complex, what's also called locally as Cave Hollow and on the maps, that it has been designated by multiple agencies as part of the Barreled Bat Conservation Fund. It has northern long-eared bats. It has newly found species like the snails, etc., that it is such a conservation concern and pristine area that these interagencies and federal government funding, $1.4 million, I believe, was through the Imperial Bat Fund, that was required of that as a conservation easement, very similar to any public park or national park, to protect that area. And LG&E wants to plow right through the middle of it. So if we go back to Bullitt County Comprehensive Plan, from step one, when they had Felicia Harper signing off on stormwater permits, that should have never happened, because all that is inconsistent with the Bullitt County Plan. Bullitt County Plan says all this is supposed to be conservation areas out here and or farmlands and retained as such. And when you look at their land uses, they would say that you don't do land uses here unless they're consistent with the plan and not for an urban purpose. A transmission pipeline is not consistent with the county plan. So even when we look at the very start of that concept, it's invalid because it's not consistent with the plan.
Right. Does that plan have some, I mean, if that plan is supposed to have legal effect, but it doesn't, it wouldn't be the first time in this case, but about the 10th time that we've seen LG&E completely disregard public interest, public need, public public needs, public interests, and also the Energy and Environment Cabinet, which includes the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it also includes the Department of Water. They're just, LG&E and all the state agencies are just completely disregarding all the legalities that should be coming into play here.
Well, with you mentioned the Department of Water and the EC. So where we stand with that, and this is again trying to keep the those listeners in touch with this, it's one of many lawsuits that are ongoing now. What we've been fighting for the last year regarding the water permit, or the illegality of the public notice, which should have prevented the permit from being even rubber stamped when it was, because there was no public notice. They did not allow initially any of the Bullitt County taxpayers and landowners. They took none of our comments pushing against why the permit was needed. But the bottom line is, during our discussions with the hearing officer, Stuart Cobb, and out of Frankfurt, the EEC and the Department of Water determined that LG&E, this is how collusion works. The EEC and the Department of Water stated in a status hearing a month and a half ago that they were going to let LG&E represent a state agency to defend the state agency's rubber stamping and illegal permitting actions. So let me clarify. That means that the EEC and the Department of Water are not taking responsibility for their bureaucrats, their engineers that approved LG&E's request for the permit. They're not having to answer for their decisions. They're letting LG&E argue against the landowners.
Can you say fox guarding the hen house? The fox is guarding the hen house. LG&E lawyers are supposed to speak in these hearings. EEC is not speaking for itself. Energy and Environment Cabinet is not speaking for itself. The Department of Water is not speaking for itself. But LG&E, a private company, a for-profit company that is has primarily a loyalty to its shareholders and not the public, they're the ones that are speaking for the Energy and Environment Cabinet, because apparently Beshear's Energy and Environment Cabinet can't speak for itself.
They cannot justify their actions because they know what they did was not in compliance with protocols, procedures, and existing law.
So what's wrong with that?
Well, it's called I guess we have a deep state in the Commonwealth here for a short plug. Everyone knows everyone. I mean,
so why isn't Steve Beshear is supposed to be a good guy? Why isn't he, with the stroke of a pen, with a phone call, Steve Beshear could be calling the Energy and Environment Cabinet, the Department of Water, Fish and Wildlife, and could be saying, how about LG&E has to get a proper permit? How about the permitting process has to be a thing? How about we actually do a permitting process? Steve Beshear with a phone call, Andy Beshear, sorry, with a phone call could make that happen.
Well, that phone call was made after he was elected, because one of his assistants, he was the Attorney General for the Commonwealth. He put one of his assistants in charge of the EEC shortly after he was elected. He came down and gave a local political speech at a rally right before the election, and he told the taxpayers that he was against big business and he would stand up and fight for landowners and their constitutional rights.
You mean he said that when he was campaigning?
When he was campaigning. It took less than 96 hours for him to remove Governor Bevin's former lead. But he replaced that individual with one of his assistants in the Attorney General's office that worked for him directly. So now that individual is the one that's got the hearing officer status, with Stuart Cobb overseeing the presentation of facts, and he's supposed to issue a ruling on that no later than October, with the final decision made by the EEC in November. But you talk about the fox guard and the hen house. Let me tell you, the Public Service Commission is a
We're not comparing LG&E lawyers to a fox. We're just saying that it's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house.
Well, again, it's an analogy. You're right. So as we have to watch our tender here, but let me give you an example of the public. So we just talked about the EEC. Let me tell you who's ran the Public Service Commission. Two previous directors from the one that's in there now. The two previous directors for the Public Service Commission, both were attorneys for LG&E for land acquisition and easement cases. The last one was Gwen Pinson, who was fired in December of 2019 based on her rubber stamping all of these permits and all. So if a taxpayer thinks that they're going to call the Public Service Commission to get assistance, they are not. The Public Service Commission, if you read the bylaws and the way the state statute 4 was rewritten by Steve Beshear before he left office and approved by the state, landowners basically have no rights. The Public Service Commission is established and facilitates public utilities' ability to provide natural gas, electricity, and other utilities to the Commonwealth ratepayers. The only time that the Public Service Commission will step in to defend the taxpayer is if there is a rate issue discussion on their monthly bills. That's all we've ever been able to get out of them. And so if you've got former utility lawyers that have been basically are hired guns by LG&E to fight landowners and under eminent domain and take them to court and bankrupt them, they're now being put in by powerful political people into positions that that oversee the Public Service Commission.
So you're saying, let me get this straight. You're saying Gwen Pinson is a former LG&E attorney who was one of the 3 commissioners of the Public Service Commission, and she was, I mean, what's wrong with her being on the Public Service Commission?
Well, does she have the public's best interests at hand, or does she have the public utility companies, private-owned utility companies for profit interests at hand?
And when we look at the administrative record, what we have been able to get out of those documents, I mean, it's almost humorous. There's so many things that could be Dilbert cartoons and really reflect Dilbert cartoons. That LG&E was pushing this thing through, saying this is a normal extension in the course of doing business. We're doing a new 12-mile pipeline, but it's an extension. It's not new. Well, it's clear it's not an extension, right? I mean, it's brand new. Right. So they didn't apply for the certificate. You know, we're just going to do this because this is part of normal business. When you look at the state statutes, the Public Service Commission had the authority to go ahead and approve something like 1 mile of electric line as an extension, or up to a $500,000 water project, you know, a couple blocks as an extension, but a new 12-mile pipeline. And so it was they never applied for it. And then later, retroactively, Public Service Commission, after they got challenged on it, gave it to them. But they didn't go through the process that they were supposed to give them the ratepayers, the consumers, and the landowners and the public notice. Didn't give us the opportunity to comment on it. They hid it under the carpet like everything else and went ahead and approved this thing, keeping it secret from the public, not doing what they were supposed to do. And therein lies the problem. And that permit was the foundation, or excuse me, that certificate for everything else that follows. And when we look at the records, that the pipelines that are going trunk off of, called the Calvary Natural Gas Pipeline, that pipeline is 70 years old, 53 miles long. It cannot pass federal safety inspections. They have this thing called a pipeline integrity gauge. They send it through that pipe to check it for dings and problems and corrosion and holes and that sort of thing. Repeatedly, this thing failed every test. LG&E violated federal pipeline regulations and didn't report it in the allotted time. What Public Service Commission do? They came back and looked at it and said, well, you didn't report it. We've got a problem. Can't you just sort of fudge numbers? Can't you just do something different? Can't you make up a different test? And that's all in writing. Screw public safety. Let's just sort of modify, try to see if we can't pass something, because if you don't pass something, you're not compliant. And then when we look at it, what they finally have passed some areas, but what they have passed is what they call HCAs, high consequence areas. That, okay, Bardstown is probably safe right there in the city. Mount Washington is probably safe right there in the city, but everybody else, good luck to them.
So
and that's one of our concerns. Why in the world are you going to allow the LG&E to put a new pipeline, maybe multiple pipelines. We've been told that they could put up to 3 pipelines off this thing, to this 70-year-old pipeline that can't pass federal inspections, that it was designed for other things 70 years ago, and now they're going to increase and change the throughput. And the other part of this that's come out through open records is what they call reverse flows, that instead of sending natural gas one direction, they're going to move it in different directions back and forth around the systems. And the United States Pipeline Hazardous Material Safety Administration says, you do not do that, it goes boom. And that's part of the plans that Public Service Commission is going for LG&E, and we're going to create this new pipeline off that 70-year-old line.
So what I hear you saying is that the Calvary pipeline, which they're going to, they're going to bring in gas from the Calvary pipeline, put it through this new pipeline. Calvary pipeline is a 70-year-old, 50-mile pipeline that doesn't pass inspection. But are you saying that LG&E is just saying, oh, can't you just, LG&E is trying to be out of compliance?
There's multiple documents showing.
To ignore the lack of compliance here.
Well, here's Art, real quick, that cathodic test is used just much like Paul was mentioning. That cathodic test does several things. Number one, it tests the surety of the pipeline itself. It looks for and it sees with a visual camera, in some cases where there's compromises in the 70-year-old pipeline. It shows rusting. It shows deterioration. It shows the joints. It will sit there and track the width of the joints, because what most people may not be aware of is that fluid natural gas has residue. It has residue based on the raw formula that it is when it's liquefied and passes through. So after 70 years, periodically, every natural gas company is supposed to run cleaning solutions and bore steam cleaners or whatever through those pipelines to remain consistent with the flow pressure that's needed on the other end. I have only seen where LG&E certified 5.5 miles of using a cathodic test. In each case that they failed, or the equipment was lost in the pipeline, is where they reached a directional change of the pipeline itself, which means there's probably more built-up residue in those areas. The fact that the cathodic test device could not be moved in those pipelines, and in some cases the equipment was lost in the pipeline, shows that there should be concerns by all ratepayers as well as those that have a gas line, that the pipeline may be compromised to the point where reverse flow starts. It may cause a catastrophic failure in the line. But we don't know.
And that's one of the things that all the public should be concerned about, because when you're talking about reverse flows against what the United States Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration says, you should not be doing it, and they're doing it across the systems. What could be the impacts? If we look at Boston up in Massachusetts, if you remember about a year ago when multiple towns blew up,
right?
Could that happen here? Well, no one's told us, like communities right to know with the hazardous waste. There are so many issues with this, and Colonel Parker mentioned something about cathodic protection. If you look at all the LG&E documents, one of the things they talk about is that the pipeline will be near a power line for a considerable distance. They never explain that considerable distance. So over by Ken Brown's farm, there's an electrical substation that the pipeline will be going right near the electrical substation. From that substation, across my farm, across part of Bernheim, and all the way over toward I-65 is about 5 miles that they're planning on putting this pipeline underneath of Eastern Kentucky Power high voltage lines. Multiple studies by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and environmental impact statements, and also by the INGA Foundation, and I can't remember the acronym INGA, but it's very clear. You do not put a pipeline under a power line because what's called cathodic discharge or cathodic energetic discharges causes explosions. Yeah. And typically, you've got to have a separation of like a half mile to a mile for public protection. So there's a problem in and of itself. And so what we've been able to dig out so far is a 12-inch pipeline has about a 500-yard blast radius. 500 yards either side. Now, what we've been told looking at the easements and by an easement appraiser specialist, that the way things are on this one set up, they could put in 3 pipelines into the 1 quarter. So does that mean 1,500 yards either side could blow up? And now we've got churches, we've got schools, we've got families with houses, we've got a woodland complex over there that, if you remember a couple of years ago when Smoky Mountain National Park caught on fire and couldn't be put out, or like the Western fires, what's going to happen when that happens over there? And we probably have a couple thousand people that live over in those hill complexes with only one road in, one road out, and very small roads, and those people are toast.
Well, hold on a minute.
I think the analogy part, and it's most recent for those that live in central Kentucky here and even moving east, is what happened in, I believe it was Lincoln County last year when they had a catastrophic failure. That pipeline that was there almost mirrors exactly the same depth that LG&E proposes for this line, 3 to 5 feet, no more than that. But that pipeline blew up, and if you saw the images that were on TV, you could see the blast radius and the fact that it burned down an entire motor park, killed one lady and injured a bunch of others. But that was a catastrophic miss. If it had been 100 yards or 150 yards closer where it was compromised at, they could have possibly killed everybody in that trailer park before they had a chance to get out and run.
Nothing is risk-free. Everything has risk. Nothing is risk-free.
Well, we have to ask a question. Once again, back at Bullitt County Plan, and one of the things Friends of Cedar Grove has done, we've been working with the Bullitt County judge. We've been working on the Highway 245 tourism corridor planning process, if you've heard of that, of things that we're going to do in that area to promote tourism related to Bernheim and the corridor and the scenic and natural amenities we have in this area. And once again, why in the world would you put something that could blast 1,500 yards near the interstate, near the rest area, near Bernheim Forest, where it gets 5,000 kids sometimes a week when they had the giants out there during the summertime? Now, not right now with COVID, but those are the kind of risks that we're talking about with this pipeline, not to mention all the residents up and down the pipeline route and churches.
So, Paul, a little while ago, you were talking about you're not supposed to have a pipeline near electric lines. And is there the possibility of a spark, you say a cathodic? I might have gotten the...
Yeah, it's called cathodic discharge and cathodic energy. That the power line has obviously electric stuff going on in it. The pipeline also has an electric charge going through it that somehow, and I don't understand the science of it, but how it helps convey the gas through the tube. It energizes it.
Right.
So anytime you put these linear features near another electric source or actually another metallic source such as that, there's actually angles of incidence that they can cross without blowing things up. But when you get them too close together, that's where all these environmental impact statements are saying this is and that's probably what happened in Lincoln County. All indications, it's near that railroad track. They haven't said that yet. It hadn't been disclosed, but that's probably, it's a good probability that that's what is going on down there in Lincoln County, and could very well happen here with them putting it underneath that power line. It's a couple different things. Eastern Kentucky Power won't come out and say it, but the science says also that energy from the pipeline not only made the power line blow up the pipeline, but the energy from the pipeline may affect those metal poles and affect their electrical capabilities going down through there, doing things to the systems that shouldn't be done. So that right there is a major, major problem that no one discusses. And once again, if we go back and look at Lonnie Beller's testimony and everything LG&E puts out, they're saying a considerable distance. I consider 5 miles a long distance, not mention put it right beside an electrical substation. On my farm in particular, and also on Kim Brown's farm, the other thing that people need to understand is that there's other infrastructure here. Okay, what happens when that power station goes down and people up here, like my parents who just died a year ago when all this stuff was going on, that no longer do they have electricity because something's happened to affect their electricity, which affects their oxygen concentrators or something of that nature. What happens when their water goes down? That right there on our two farms, that there's what's called Mid-Valley Pipeline, and it is a national critical infrastructure, crude oil pipeline serving through 14 states. That there's all kinds of critical infrastructure that can or would be or might be impacted if something goes wrong, not mention the people that may be impacted.
So Hart, real quick.
Guys, it's been a while. Christy hasn't had much of a chance to talk yet.
Sorry, Christy.
Let's let her get a word in edgewise.
My major concern, all these things that they have said, everything that they have said, in addition with the sinkholes, the unstable soils, the fact that there is no fire hydrants in this, and if you look at just the normal expansion and contraction of soils and what it does to your home with drywall pops, ceiling pops, things like that, what is that going to do with the tension and the torsion on these pipelines in these areas? It's already going to have the cathodic load. It's already going to have these, electrical things. And then you're going to put these in sinkholes and karst. We're not going to know where these are going at all and how far this is really going to truly affect and the waterways.
So there's this the geology around here is like intense karst. Karst means caves. Caves are cavities in the ground that are either filled with air or water or something else. But there's lots and lots and lots of karst, lots of soft rock like sandstone, and you have the ground that's very flexible, and they're wanting to bury a pipeline through this without regard to how that soft ground can bend and contort a pipeline, and also without regard to how the pipeline can leak into the water supply. This pipeline is supposed to go across 7 streams and waterways, all of which flow into the Salt River. But anyway, just trying to name some of the risks involved in this.
Well, the risk goes back to the Calvary line in itself. To be clear, and to have the public understand, the Calvary line was put in the ground 70 years ago, long before we ever had federal regulatory oversight of what type of gauge, grade, and protective coatings that pipeline should have had on it in today's standards. So it's been in the ground for 70 years. It has been deteriorating since the day it was put in the ground. It's not a matter of when a catastrophic blowout's going to occur. If they don't replace that line in accordance with today's standard, it's just a matter of when is it going to happen and where is it going to happen. And we think that once the reverse flow, which changes the pressure, changes the alignment based on the metallurgy and how it's already been formed and pressurized in a single direction, if they start reversing that flow, then it basically puts an undue amount of pressure on possibly compromised joints and or angle deflection within the system itself. The other piece.
Let me just recap a little bit of that. So you have Calvary Pipeline, which is a 70-year-old deteriorating pipeline that doesn't pass inspection. They want to reverse the flow. That reverse flow changes the dynamics and just it's going to put strain on it where it hasn't been strained before. And like you said, it's just a matter, it's not a question of whether, but when the thing is going to bust and either get into the water supply or explode.
Correct.
Well, beyond what they may do with the system on reverse flows, it is, they're already going to be changing the throughput, the capacity, and what's happening to create this new feed going out on these new transmission lines where they put 1, 2, or 3 here. So that automatically is going to be changing dynamics from that pipeline.
And we've seen a movie a while ago about tornadoes and the perfect storm. Well, there's one piece of property that represents the perfect storm. The Brown Farm, in particular, has the eastern Bullitt County has one of the only water towers that provides the pressure, elevated water tower that provides the water pressure to those that have city or county water. That's located less than 50 yards from Eastern Kentucky Power's power station, which serves as a central power grid for the mid region and the bluegrass area here. Also co-located on that land within 100 yards is the Mid-Valley Pipeline that Paul talked about. And now on top of that, we're going to put in, running right beside all of that, we're going to put in a high-pressure gas line. So you have 4 separate utilities, some representing strategic natural resources for the U.S. government, others which provide central mid-Kentucky and Indiana area with the power, eastern Bullitt County for water, natural drinking water, and now we're going to run a high-pressure gas line for Jim Beam through there. Are we not setting the conditions for a catastrophic perfect storm event? And I think the answer to that is yes. It's highly doubtful that this would occur in a state that would have regulatory agencies that took the concern of the taxpayers and the common citizens' quality of life and the hazards that we're going to face here with all this. If Jim Beam gets that pipeline put in
one of the things that we ought to point out right there, because Colonel Parker, with his vast military background, I was formerly a captain with the United States Army Reserve, they're always talking about targets. And Colonel Parker can elaborate on C3, command, control, communication, and strategic targets. But one of the things that came out of LG&E was we cannot release this information because of terrorism, threat of terrorism. If we really wanted to engage in a terrorist-type activity, what perfect place to do it than right there in a central hub of infrastructure? And they repeatedly claimed terrorism issues and concerns.
They claim terrorism, and they tell you they're going to put markers to show the public where the easement's at for the high-pressure gas line, every mile marker, and every any area where there's an elevation change. There's going to have 2 markers that point out the nice, clean-cut easement that they're going to maintain forever. So you can see the falsehoods in them saying they're trying to prevent any erroneous terrorists from knowing exactly where the pipeline's going. Hell, they're going to mark it and boundary it to show where their easements are for the life of the pipeline.
So you're saying that LG&E is capable of falsehoods?
In many cases, maybe half-truths or not being, it's only real. You only have to tell the story once. If you own the strategic communication message, nobody listens to the follow-up news stories. So much like they're claiming that they're working hand in hand with us and trying to resolve issues with the landowners, and they've not been too flexible since we've been doing this.
Well, once again, they blame the landowners, they blame Bermheim, they blame everybody, but they had studied 10 different routes. Why didn't they select one of those 10 routes? And part of the problem is some of their fake news that they put out is how comprehensive and how thorough they've engaged in environmental studies and environmental analysis. The problem is they've only looked at the lowlands. And they're looking at the wetlands, the rivers, the streams. They're not going to high areas. They're not looking up here at the Indian burial sites. They're not looking at the archaeological features. And as Chrissy says, all this stuff with the water side, that's a big concern, because in this karst topography, and that's something that I wouldn't want us to lose sight of, there are a lot of poor people in this area. A lot of us, in fact, my family, we still have 3 wells right here on our property. That a lot of us still use wells, a lot of us still use springs. A lot of us are dependent on those water sources that they're planning on engaging in. Well, first off, they shouldn't be doing pipelines in a karst area anyway, because it damages or destroys all this substructure and or creates contamination paths for this stuff to get into the groundwater. All this groundwater perks and leaks, as Christy talks about, down in cave stuff, but more importantly, it goes into aquifers, and that is what we use for drinking. They've already planned on part of this process they're going to do is what's called horizontal directional drilling. And they're going to take these drilling machines, rigged somehow, and push through various areas and under streams and under roads. Well, the question becomes, how much can or could they damage aquifers and karst substructures, which if you look at the Permian Parkway down in Texas, Permian Pipeline, they've already had, and also several other instances across the country that we'd be happy to share with anybody. where these directional drillings have damaged aquifers, that they say it's entirely safe to do this drilling, that it's a safe mud, it gets bentonite, it's kind of like soil. Problem is that the soil has this gel, this lubricant on it, and it's carcinogenic. And they have these other pipelines, it's been shown, like the Permian down in Texas, it is contaminated groundwater, it's contaminated people's wells, and caused tremendous problems. Those people will never be able to use those wells again. And the other point that is really important related to this, that the public hadn't even been informed of, is that if we could identify, they have drilled at least 12 wells. Now, we call them wells. Now, when we went back in and the lawyer started parsing words with us and semantics because we said wells, because they never did well, okay, we were wrong because we're not lawyers and we're not geoscientists. They had geotechnical survey boreholes, at least 12 of them, 3 of which were drilled to at least 320 feet. And some of them blew natural gas for a week. When we look back at the Insight USA study, it was talking about maybe doing 6 of these boreholes. I think 4 of them at 40 feet and 2 of them at 60 feet. Never ever in Insight USA plans was there anything of 320 feet. We've been told by geoengineers, you would not go down 320 feet if you're looking at putting in a pipeline. So the question is, what other secret purposes are they planning on doing? Are they planning on engaging in fracking like's been going around the country and damaging water supplies and damaging aquifers? Are they planning on, like over, if you look near Muldraw over toward Fort Knox, there's a place called Natural Gas Storage Field over there. We do know that there's 13 acres they bought, or at least from one of our neighbors, for something. What is that something? This part of Bullitt County has had natural gas. It's also had underground gas fields before, oil fields. So are they planning on turning this whole area into a natural gas storage field that's basically a big propane tank ready to explode at any point in time? Or are they planning on stealing the farmers' natural gas, or is there something else? But anyway, the public should have a right to know, why were they drilling down 320 feet? What did they do to damage those water supplies and those aquifers? And why wasn't the state out here? And when we had the state out here, they said, yeah, these violations, we got to go after them. We got to go ahead and find them. We got to get this stuff capped right. And lo and behold, once again, as Colonel Parker talks about the deep state and all the actions that are not fulfilling their legal duties, once again, that was some of the stuff that has transpired.
Well, not only that,
And we actually,
sorry.
Go ahead, Christy.
I was going to say, the code says that the core hose samplings and the bore hose are only limited to 100 feet. Anything past 100 feet, they were supposed to get a permit, to which they lied about and said that they did not need a permit. And they did, in fact, if you go to the oil and gas code on the EEC's website, it has that all on there. They were supposed to get permits, to which they said that they didn't because it's at 320 feet. So that's what we're trying to fix now. Because regardless of the pipeline, those wells are here to stay.
Right. So you have one set of legalities if the hole is less than 100 feet. If it's more than 100 feet, then it's a whole different set of requirements. And Christy, you're saying that they should have gotten a permit. Can we imagine LG&E not getting a permit? I mean, doesn't LG&E always get a permit for everything?
Oh, there was no permit for that.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
well, yeah, and you know, you're spot on with that, to the point where when we tried to submit videotaping of them drilling illegally on farmland, Hart, the EEC and the Department of Water, the LG&E filed a motion to deny our ability to put those video recordings and audio tapes into evidence that shows that they were in direct violation. And so again, if you've got the hen protecting the fox protecting the hen house, this is just another example of where the utility company, you know, continues to blame the landowners as to why they can't get natural gas. And I will go back to the first argument. If LG&E had done everything correctly, if they were transparent, if every agency in this state that's supposed to protect and oversee our quality of lives and our security and safety, if they had done everything correctly, this would not still be going on 3.5 years later. There's something wrong when landowners can hold up a pipeline because of all the illegalities that we have brought forth based on our research, our open records requests, and our question and answer sessions with agency officials that in many cases had no idea that we could, add simple things like 1 + 1 = 2. I think that they thought LG&E, in their own right, has done this TTP technique, tactic, and procedure the entire time of the existence of the company because it's for profit. They've been able to get away with this in many cases without ever having anyone raise a finger or raise a question or request an alibi to go back and take a look at anything. And that's why they've been able to get away with it for so long, to the point where they're inferior to regulations and oversight because they know that the state in most cases are just going to rubber stamp it and approve it. And once the permit is issued, it's over. There's no arguing whether it was done legally, and that's what we're fighting for right now. Permits were issued illegally, not in compliance with regulatory oversight, and that's why we're arguing this still to this day, 3.5 years later. So the onus is on LG&E to say this. If you did everything right, if you were open and transparent with the community, why are there so many open questions related to your illegal permits that were approved by individuals, in many cases that weren't qualified to stamp approved at the local level, and now we're finding at the state level. So
that's I think that's where we should end it. We're got just a minute or two left. Does anybody want to kind of give us some final words of wisdom, or what is it that you would like for people to know? If you had to capture it in 30 to 60 seconds, what is it you would like for people to know?
I think if anything else, it's just that people need they need to be engaged with their community and the elected officials that we entrust to take care of us, protect us, and have our best interests at hand. And what we've seen time and time again is these officials, whether they're politically nominated, their nominative assignments, or once they get elected, it's almost as if they turn a blind eye to the common people, the blue-collar workers, the farmers that make up the soul of the community itself. And they could care really less about the children, the landowners, your constitutional and state rights. It's been an interesting ride for 3.5 years to watch how many officials have basically turned a blind eye or refused to even be engaged with protecting the very people that elected them and put them into office.
And the thing is, all three of y'all you're using your own time for this. LG&E has all these lawyers. They're making money on this. They're wanting to make money. They're already making money by raising rates on average taxpayers who won't benefit from the pipeline. Meanwhile, Jim Beam, that does have to pay for the pipeline, or that will benefit from the pipeline, is not paying for the pipeline. LG&E is already making money off of this, paying a bunch of lawyers to do what they do. Meanwhile, y'all are just property owners trying to protect what's yours. Don't get me started.
Now we're paying again. We've already paid for our land. We own our land, only to be turned around in short order and told that in order to keep your land and to use it the way you want to, and for your family's legacy and for your estate, you've got to now put up thousands of dollars in legal fees to fight what's rightfully been rightfully due to begin with. But I think what the community may end up having to do, and we're in touch with many groups, is we may just have to let the community protest Bernheim, or not Bernheim, but Jim Beam and LG&E, and go ahead and bring in entities that I've been in discussion with, and let the media then help determine which direction this goes. I just think it's criminal that a public for-profit bourbon company from Japan can abuse and get its pipeline paid for free when it's a multi-billion-dollar corporation. If we're going to pay $43 million in taxes and rate increases for Jim Beam, why doesn't Jim Beam give us $43 million to build new schools, to pay for their sewers, to pay for their roads, to pay for their tax breaks, to pay for their free water, to pay for their gas? Why isn't Jim Beam reinvesting in the community that is serving them by giving them a free gas line? And Lord knows this county needs infrastructure built and sustained to maintain our economic base and to facilitate our quality of life here in Bullitt County.
Great. We're going to have to end it there. Thank you all so much for joining me. We're going to have to come back soon and revisit this conversation. Have a great day. Thanks to our listeners for joining us.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your interest in our concerns.
Bye now.